All right, you're on.
Good evening and happy Valentine's Day, and welcome to the February 14th, 2023 Zoning Board of Appeals regular monthly meeting for the Village of Ossining. This is a public hearing that is quasi judicial. As such, I want to remind everyone in the building and on Zoom that we have rules for those using we have rules for the meeting. We ask that no one speaks in the audience. If you have something to say or need to discuss, we ask that you please take it outside of the room and down the hall toward the front door. If you talk outside of the conference room doors, your conversation will echo back and we'll hear everything that you say. When you come up before the board, you must provide your name and address. Remember, you are addressing the board. You are not speaking to an applicant or their representative. Applicants and representatives, please remember you are addressing the board. We are using a hybrid format. The public will continue to have the opportunity to see and hear the meeting live through Zoom and provide comments during the appropriate time. In order to participate, please do the following. Members of the public attending online via the Zoom app may use the raise hand feature at the appropriate time if you would like to make a comment. The feature is located at the bottom of the screen. I'm sure you understand that by now. We've been using Zoom for a while. Those attending via telephone can press *9. The meeting host will see that your hand is raised or that you have pressed *9, and we will unmute those waiting one at a time so that you can speak. Comments can also be emailed during the public hearing to the Village Planning Department at PLAN at villageofossining.org. The meeting will be recorded and a transcript of the meeting will be available at a later date. Now, in order to keep the meeting a little bit orderly, there are some ground rules. And the ground rules are, and to ensure that we get a clear recording, please follow these rules. When you are given access to speak, please state your name and address. If you are speaking during the public hearing, please limit your comments to the matter, which is the subject of the hearing. And if any speaker is inappropriate, they will immediately be cut off and access removed. At this point in time, I see our village attorney, Linda Whitehead, is going to do the roll call. Maybe.
Sorry. Marlene Cheatham,
We can't hear you, Linda.
can you hear me now?
Oh, she unmuted.
Mute. Maybe it's the speaker here. Joe, can we see if you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear everybody.
No,
No, it's our speaker.
It's our speaker.
Okay, hold on.
Hold on a second. Yeah, other way. There you go.
Try again?
Can you hear me now?
No. Okay, so can we have Taryn do the roll call?
I can do it.
Okay, I can do it myself.
Hold on 1 second. Michael Spall,
Hi, here.
Robert Durayo,
Present.
Olga Montez, present, Kyle Abarizik,
Present.
Brian Granoff,
Present.
and Chair Cheatham.
Present.
Okay,
Also with us tonight are our Assistant Village Manager, Maddie Zahach, Building Inspector Joseph Agostinelli, I don't know if she's here, Board Secretary Jamie Kane, maybe, Land Use Attorney Linda Whitehead, and Assistant Land Use Attorney Taryn Ramsey, and I just gave Taryn a whole title, so. So if we're ready, let's get started. On the agenda for tonight, if I can find my agenda. Somewhere. There it is. On the agenda for tonight is first is the approval of the minutes from. Can't be right. This is October. It's the December and the January 2023 minutes. And may I have a motion if everyone has had a chance to look at those?
So moved. Seconded.
If there is no objection by unanimous consent, the minutes for the December 15th, 2022 and January 10th, 2023 meeting is adopted. Motion carried. Thank you very much. Next up, new business of the board, ZBA 01-2023, 2 Church Street, Open Door Family Medical Center. And I know I saw Lindsay here and her staff. Come on.
Jerry Tortorella is gonna be presenting.
Okay, so Jerry, I hear is in the,
Okay, we're gonna promote Jerry and we're gonna try to figure out what's going on with the sound.
Can you take a second?
Yeah, totally, please. Oh. Okay, they can hear us. Oh, yeah.
Good evening. How are you all tonight?
Oh,
Oh, I heard
sometimes,
something.
Something's moving.
Can you hear me?
Now you.
That's computer audio. Or 2 seconds.
I can hear her.
there we go. Kyle.
We like keeping Kyle around for his technical assistance. Thank you, Kyle.
Can you hear me now?
we can hear
Can
you
hear
now.
Very good. Thank you very much. And thanks for tolerating me appearing remotely this evening. I appreciate it. We're here on behalf of Open Door Family Medical Center. And I know that Chuck Utchik from Langen Engineering, if he has not arrived yet, will be arriving shortly. And I know he's on his way there. But if we can just start by way of giving you just a brief explanation and some context as to why we're here this evening, then we'd like to present the site plan to you, or the aspects of the site plan that relate to our variance request this evening, and then I can just take you through the criteria and why we believe that the variances should be granted. I want to also let you know that Lindsay Farrell, who's the CEO and president of Open Door, is in the audience. And with her is Michelle Naway. She's the Senior Director of Capital Projects. And as I mentioned, Chuck Utchik will be joining us shortly. And Mike Tucker, who's also an engineer with Langen, may be on and may be showing the site plan for our presentation purposes. You know, Open Door has been a long-term member of the community and has been providing medical services largely to the underserved for decades now. And as it approached its 50th anniversary, it started to have a study done of its facilities in an effort to try to plan for the next 50 years. And it started at a time where it wanted to make sure it was optimizing medical space and its office space, and creating a state-of-the-art medical center or medical facilities to take it into the next 50 years. But what it realized is that it also needed to right-size its existing facilities, which it has been working with for these last 5 decades. And it's clear that they were just not adequate and they are necessary to be right-sized. And what came out of that study was a need to actually convert 2 Church Street to full medical purposes. And what in effect will happen is that a medical campus of sorts is being created between 165 and 2 Church Street down at that very attractive and lovely part of Ossining, at that intersection, the Y intersection. We want to be able to take a couple of minutes, I know that I'm sure you're familiar with the building, but just to orient you to the improvements that we're proposing, and then where the areas on the site are that we're seeking the variances. And if Chuck is, did I see Chuck walk into the?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
if he's ready, we're happy to turn the floor over to him. If he can just briefly summarize the site plan.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Utchig with the firm of Langen Engineering. We developed the site civil engineering drawings to support these variance applications. I think we can present our drawing if we can. Is Mike Tucker available?
We're actually gonna be handling the screen
Okay.
sharing going forward, but I will,
So I'm sure Jerry mentioned, there are 5 variances that we're after, and I guess at face value, that seems like a lot. But most of these variances are ones that relate to an existing parking lot. I'm going to kind of go through each one of them, trying to show you on the site plan where they are and explain them to you. And then I'm going to pass it back to Jerry, and she's going to talk about the balance between the benefit to the applicant and the detriment to the community, which is this board's measure to analyze our request and make a decision. the parking space sizes are deficient. Your code requires 9 by 18. And we have spaces that vary anywhere from 8 foot 6 inches to 8 foot 9 inches to 9 feet. So we're deficient in width. The length of the spaces are also slightly shorter than they're supposed to be. I think the efficiency there goes from like 16.8 feet to 18 feet. So they're short by like 1.2 feet. And this kind of varies around the site, depending on exactly which space you're looking at. You know, when it comes to striping parking spaces, sometimes a few inches here, a few inches there. But generally, we're short in width and length.
But it's existing condition.
But it's all existing conditions. In fact, on our plan in the bottom towards the building, you can see the handicap spaces, and the spaces that we are creating are conforming in size to the ADA requirements. The other deficiency is in the parking aisle. So your code calls for a 24-foot wide parking aisle, and ours isn't quite wide enough. It varies from 19 feet to 21.7 feet. But your code also doesn't have a provision for a one-way aisle. So many times, 24-foot wide aisle, parking on both sides, that's what's required. We have a one-way pattern, one way in, one way out. So drive aisles can tend to be a little bit smaller and not really affect how people get in and out of the spaces. So again, as part of your consideration here, I think understanding that this is a one-way pattern and having a drive aisle that's a little less than 24 feet doesn't really affect the way this existing parking lot has functioned and will continue to function. So those are three of the existing parking lot variances. The other one relates to your requirement that parking should be set back 2 feet from the property line. So here we don't meet that requirement. In some cases, in the bottom, in the corner there, you want to zoom in, Mike, to where we're right on the property line.
This is me zooming, not Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep saying Mike, and yeah, down in that corner. So if you're at all familiar with this site, there's a connection to another parking lot. Our spaces are right up against the property line in that one corner. As you go around the property, we're anywhere from 1.6 to 1.8. Some places we're over 3. So again, this existing condition does not meet the code requirement that you have. So those are the variances that relate to an existing parking lot. For all intents and purposes, we're not changing. We don't want to have to change. You know, if you were to say, well, what would it take to bring this parking lot up to your standards? The impact would be fairly substantial by the time we create the 24-foot drive aisle, we create the right depth and width of your parking spaces, you could impact the parking on this site by potentially as much as 25%. And then I think the goal here is, you know, we have a established entity in the community. They're wanting to expand. This creates more parking than they currently have. So kind of, we're hoping that as you add all these components up, you'll come to the conclusion that there's really very little negative impact by granting these variances. The last variance is the relationship of our building to the property line. So your code requires there be a 25-foot setback from the aqueduct. So we're adjacent to the aqueduct. And again, a majority of our existing building, if you look at the hatched part of that, you'll see that we're within that 25 feet now. And so what we're proposing to do is square off that bottom left corner and create a new entrance to this building that has a presence on the street. One of the goals here is to really give this building a connection to the street at that corner. And we also improve our functionality internally. So this gives better access to an elevator. This provides a better entrance for people coming down Church Street. We don't have a ramp. We can come right in at the right elevation to get to the entry door. So there are functional benefits to doing this. I think if you had a chance to look at the rendering, it's pretty spectacular. So they're not cutting any corners and creating this kind of presence. You know, they really want this to be kind of a focal point at this corner, and that was the goal. Yes, we need a variance. We are going to build to within the 25 feet, but we're not building any closer to the property line than the existing building. So that's kind of the technical side of what we're asking for. And again, I'd be glad to answer any questions. I would like Jerry to kind of talk about the benefit to us versus the potential detriment to the community.
There was one other, there's a voting
Oh,
regulation.
yes.
Oh, you're not.
You're correct. So I'm sure one of my team would have reminded me.
Okay, I'm helping the team.
Still trying to catch my breath from running in. So your code requires a building like this to have one loading space. We do not have a place where we can easily accommodate a loading space that has the criteria that your code includes, size and configuration and access to it. Now, 2 points to take into consideration when it comes to that. One is the facility at 165, the existing one, in the back has a loading dock, and that's where all of the real materials will come in that need to have access to a loading dock. So between the two combined facilities, we do have one. No, it doesn't meet code, but the intent is not to have significant deliveries done here. I will tell you that if a truck did come here and had to make a small delivery, there is room in the drive aisle for them to stop, quickly unload, and go on their way, and cars could still pass them in the aisle. So we think that the intent really is not to have significant deliveries here, and that if by chance a delivery truck comes here, it'll be a quick unload. It's not like there'll be a lot of supplies. So we're thinking that again, this balancing act that I know you're all taking into consideration or familiar with, I think we hope tips to our side on this issue. So that's the last of the variances that we're asking for.
So, question, how many more parking spaces, just so everyone hears it? Like, how much more than what there currently is are you providing?
I think at the end of the day, we add, I want to say 4 or 5 additional spaces. I think there's 77. I want to say we're getting it to about 82, but I have to verify.
And you're increasing the handicap parking, yes?
That's correct. So what we are doing is improving the handicap spaces, and we're making the access for those handicap spaces improved to get into the building.
So you're gonna be providing 80 spaces, right?
Yes. Yeah. And there is another component to the plan. It doesn't really result in any variances, but we are, again, you're all familiar with the site. There's a bank there and it has a drive-through, right? And so the goal is to convert that drive-through to a patient drop-off. And although I'm not completely familiar with the current operation, I understand that drop-offs now can affect traffic a little bit at the existing 165. So we're hoping that this will actually improve that. People can come in, you can drop a patient off at the front door, and then you can go find a parking space. So
So the bank's not there anymore.
the bank will not be there anymore.
And the other offices, the rest of the building, I know had kind of a mixed use,
It's all going to be
the medical office.
correct.
So for the benefit of the board and the community, would you mind showing the architectural drawings or just the kind of,
Sure.
because you referenced the change, which is both character and also now you're going to be up to the street. So having people see the difference here that you were referencing. I think it's the next. No, after that.
Keep going.
There it
The
is.
3 ones. So that's the corner.
And this is the trail.
As you look into the drawing on the right side, right, that's going up the aqueduct. And then the other side is the street. So they're in essence, to see the fan looking portion of the building.
Right.
That's the addition. And then there's the stairs going down to the aqueduct. So we're going to take out the older things that are there. And hopefully, again, open it up and make it look like a spectacular entrance to this building.
The aqueduct itself will act as if people are walking on the aqueduct as they normally do to recreate, what about these folks? Are they gonna still be able to do that?
Yes.
And will they also there'll be entrances into this building from the aqueduct?
So the entrance to the building, if you see the two shadows closest to the building next to each other.
Right.
That's the door, and that's the point at which the grade is generally level with the street.
Right.
You could walk up the aqueduct, come to the stairs, walk up to the stairs and go in the front door. You can come from the street up the stairs and go in the front door. We don't change the current experience on the aqueduct itself. There's kind of a curvy walkway,
Right.
there's a tree planter that comes out, and we create this much cleaner,
Right.
kind of squared off step area where you could actually sit if you wanted to, but it gives this presence to that building.
I guess my only concern is that the aqueduct was created as a trailway, probably based on some sort of either legislation or rules, things of that sort. Is this use or this adjacent use in character with that, and does that need to be changed? In other words, is there a legal reason why using part of the aqueduct property cannot be done?
So what we're proposing technically stays on our property. However, the answer to your question is a good one, and yes, there is a process. So we've engaged in the conversation. In fact, I believe Aqueduct, the folks at the Parks Department that are responsible for this, we will be engaging in a conversation with them. The planning board will not take an action until such time as they're comfortable that what we're proposing is okay with the Aqueduct folks, the Parks Department. So yes, we're going to get there.
Yeah.
It's in the planning board's purview to make sure that we get that approval. So that's the path that we'll follow for that.
And there's no physical threat or problem with getting closer to the old retired piping that's underneath the ground or anything?
None whatsoever.
Okay.
All of our structure
Okay,
is far enough away.
okay.
I saw your site plans, environmental survey and all that, so that looks good. My only question is that, although it's private property, since you're encroaching on the aqueduct, is that going to be publicly accessible to sit there or only for clients of One Medical?
Everybody can sit.
Okay.
I think the goal here is to create a corner. And you see some of this new form-based zoning where they're
Right.
trying to bring the buildings to the street.
Right.
I think that was Candon's objective here. And in doing so, inviting the public to feel like it's a comfortable place. I think opening it up, it'll be brighter. It will feel more open. I don't know if I've walked down the path in that area and, it is what it is. It's very nice. But we think this will be a substantial improvement.
So, Michael, that part of the trail is highly developed on both sides already. And
Okay.
so if you've seen, I was looking, I went in person just to kind of check it out. Kind of looks little bricks are coming out of the sidewalk and things are kind of lifting up there, but that seems a little bit more inviting if it's indeed for public.
But it's also a fairly dense space too, in other words, from the point where you see the sculpture in the middle of the road there,
Mhm.
where, we have the wheel in the middle of the road to the property line. It's not that far. It's just one lane of traffic.
Right.
So I was just concerned about the fact that how much of the aqueduct could possibly be impacted by this.
It'll feel, I think, our sense is that it's going to feel way more open than it does now. I think as you come across the street and you go into the aqueduct, you almost feel like it's kind of the trees are kind of enclosing it. It's a bit of a tunnel effect. This will not feel like that at all.
Okay. My other question was, you were talking about loading docks and things of that sort. This is a medical facility, so I would assume there's going to be some fairly heavy duty machines that are going to need to go in the building in order to perform its function. Is that true or not?
At the onset.
On the onset.
They'll
be able to do that.
Yes,
Okay.
that's not a problem at the onset.
Okay.
We will take up most of the parking lot. All our tenants will be gone. So there'll be no one parking in the parking lot. So we will use the parking lot to mobilize for the construction. And we still have a bit of work to do to figure out the logistics of the construction at that corner. But from the perspective of bringing in everything that needs to go in the building, we'll do that. Good.
I have one last question. As you stated before, there's limited amount of parking now, and these variances that you're asking for will actually increase the parking spaces. Will that increase in parking spaces be allotted for your employees? I know right now with your limited parking, some of them end up on Maple Street. Is that going to be like patients only, or can employees?
So we're not going to differentiate spaces at this point. So it'll be open to all.
First come, first served.
Obviously, there's a large portion of the patient population here arrives by public transportation, right, and those kind of things. So I think some of the folks that work there will park there.
Just because I've got a couple of elderly relatives on Maple Street, and sometimes it's hard to find
In the space.
a space.
Well, they've got, they're adding, actually, they're going from 1 to 4 handicap or accessible parking spaces. That's what I see.
Yeah.
And like my client likes to say, I currently have 0 parking and now I have 80 spaces. So for my client, she's all happy about that.
Mhm.
And administration is leaving.
Right.
We're moving to Tarrytown. Oh, yeah, we can't say.
So this will primarily be patient oriented.
Yeah.
Obviously there'll be staff, but primarily patient oriented.
And these are early days on this project, because we're not the lead agency. The planning board is, I believe, yes.
Correct. We've had a visit with the planning board 2 weeks ago. We need to work out the Parks Department discussion and aqueduct. We need them to be comfortable with your position, because on the heels of your decision, we have a parking waiver, so we are deficient from a code perspective by a few spaces. So you're kind of the next step before we can go back to the planning board in earnest and try and advance the application.
So,
Can I ask a question, like internally, I'm just curious, like, is there a reason why the 25 feet rule is in effect? Like, is there a reason, like, is it environmental or?
It's a whole process. Yeah.
it's an ordinance that's, and Joe can weigh in on, where that, it's been there since probably before you were born.
I mean, sometimes those setbacks came along with the aqueduct when it was a live aqueduct. We have those in other places and they're very sensitive about activity around it.
This is just a walking, hiking trail, but it used to
right.
supply water.
Mhm.
So, but again, it's 25 feet for two-way traffic. But this is one way in and one way out. So
Right.
technically, you're just going around. So you don't have cars going side by side at
Right.
all.
It's not like Hunter Street.
Yes.
Question. Are we able to do the questions about the parking tonight, or do we need to wait for the planning? We got a chicken and egg situation. I'm not sure where we're at.
We're just the variances, so when we grant the variances and if they,
I think maybe
Okay,
Jerry will help answer that, or Linda.
Yeah, or I can answer it. This is a type 2 under secra. So you do not need to wait for the planning board to do secra. You can go ahead and act.
Okay. But first and foremost, we need to find out if there's anyone, if we can open the public hearing.
let's see.
Oh,
Yeah, as a type 2 action, you guys can move ahead.
May I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved, Kyle.
second, Bob.
Okay, think about it. Is there anyone, if there's no objection to open the public hearing, then the public hearing is now opened on this particular application. Is there anyone in the audience to speak on this?
Got one here.
I see a hand raised.
There's a hand raised here. Too. Oh, you're just.
That's Mr. Varela, who has her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Probably
Just hand up.
just gentlemen.
Come on up.
Good evening, members of the board. John Perillo, 72 Havel Street in Austin, New York. I support the Austin Open Door. I have for the past maybe 40 years. I've been on various boards that have given Austin Open Door many approvals. So I do have a concern. Parking has always been a question with Austin Open Door. If you reread the past approvals that they have given, and it's not their fault. It's a lot of people tie up the main street parking for the merchants. That's always a question and concern of the merchants during the years. The aqueduct is owned by and maintained internally by, I believe, the Taconic State Parks Commission. Our Parks Department may do the surface maintenance on it, leaves and brush and stuff like that, but they probably have to get some type of approval from the Taconic State Parks Commission. Variances go with the property. I believe that's always been with the way it is. They're not just for this particular application. So if Austin Open Door stays there for 100 years, there's no problem. If they don't, the variances that you're going to give goes with the property, whatever business may go in there. So now is your time to conform. I mean, that's why they're here. So once again, it'll be interesting if somebody in the administration rereads the other approvals given by the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, and the village board of their concerns, and see if, you know, how they did regarding the concerns of the various approvals, because you don't want this to snowball. So I wish them well. But once again, now is the time to conform. That's why they're here. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, by the way.
Nice to see you guys.
Is there anyone else from the audience or on Zoom to speak on this application?
Hey, Jerry.
I would like to be heard if it's my opportunity and chance.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thanks very much. So I just to add a couple of things that Chuck has made me irrelevant because he did such an excellent job with that presentation, and your questions elicited a lot of what I was going to say. But I do want to point a few things out to just make it clear about the improvements in relation to the aqueduct. The existing improvements that are on the site, that kind of, you know, wraparound walkway and the retaining area and the planted area, actually encroaches further into the aqueduct than we are proposing with these stairs. So there actually will be pulling back slightly from the location of the existing improvements and pulling back from the aqueduct. So there'll be a more open area as well. And we're proposing to put new concrete down in the area that we're opening up so that it can meld nicely with the existing aqueduct pavement. So, and you can see that on the site plan. You can see kind of the half circle, and it's shaded underneath the stairs, and you can see the relationship of the stairs and where the stairs end, and the actual existing improvements butt out a little closer to the aqueduct. So I just want to point that out. That, coupled with the fact that we're removing a lot of the overhanging vegetation and opening up the area, I think will create a more inviting experience in that location. And one of the intentions with the architectural design was that we would also kind of complement, you know, the downtown revitalization initiative that you're undertaking, because we want to make this a nice statement along the streetscape and along in the vicinity of the Y intersection, and have the two buildings, 165 Main and 2 Church, speak to each other, if you will, so that there's kind of some commonality and some relationship between them. In terms of deliveries, we did mention in our submission letter that to the extent large vehicle deliveries will be required, we are able to schedule those and coordinate those. We control the building. So, you know, to the extent it needs to block any parking or whatever, it will be for limited periods of time, and we'll be able to, you know, control that through scheduling. So I think in that way, we're dealing with the lack of a loading berth in a responsible way and in a way that won't impact anyone. You know, it's when you're looking at the impact on community character, it's I think a salient point to remember that these are existing conditions. We are not proposing any new improvements other than replacing the existing improvements near the aqueduct with the building construction to square off the building so that we can create an appropriate entrance. There really is not an appropriate entrance into the building at that corner at this time. You cannot get to an elevator with any ease. The first and second floor are not linked to one another. All of that will be accomplished when we are able to square off the building and create this new entrance. And we're doing it in a way where we're not losing parking, we're not jeopardizing existing improvements and the utility of existing improvements, and we're making functional space in that location. We think it, in an aesthetically pleasing way that contributes to the character of the downtown area. There's nothing inconsistent with what we're proposing in relation to improvements in the area. So we're certainly not creating a detriment to the use or the enjoyment of surrounding properties. We don't have a delivery loading berth now, so it's not like we're taking one away. And we are improving the handicap access on the site. So, we think all of those things are very positive improvements. We are not losing parking. So I know the comment was made that, that now's the time to make sure that we conform. I just want to make sure that the board understands we're not seeking a parking variance from the board. We're just trying to legalize existing conditions, largely because we are before the board, and this is an opportunity for, the boards and the administration to kind of bring this site into conformity with existing improvements. So, we really, we can't achieve the objective that we're trying to achieve without being able to square off the building and without being able to, create a better entrance into the building. We recognize that we need to get approval and the cooperation of the State Parks Department, and we are working on that. And of course, any approvals that this board gives, we would not presume that they would include approvals off-site that are not within your jurisdiction. There is no impact on physical or environmental conditions. We're taking a couple of trees down, but that's in the front area. That area that we want to replace with the stairs is actually run down and in disrepair and in not great condition. So we think that this would be an improvement on that. We'll have erosion control measures in place when we go through construction. We are not creating any new impervious surfaces. And as Linda indicated, this is a type 2 action, so it's presumed not to have an adverse impact on the community. And under the law, when you don't have an adverse impact on community character when variances are being requested, the question of the magnitude of the variances becomes less of a significant factor. So yes, we have 5 variances we're seeking approval for, and if you did the math on them, numerically they may seem significant, but where they don't have any impact, there's really no grounds to deny the variances on the basis of substantiality. So, we have briefed in our submission what we, the grounds for the variance, and we're happy to answer any other questions. But I think your questions really elicited a lot of the information we wanted to make sure you were focusing on.
Okay, thank you. It was very low, but we did kind of hear what you were saying, and we understand the majority of this. By full disclosure, and I did tell Leslie when I came in, I think I've seen these plans, and about 10 years, 15 years ago, when they first bought the building, and they were looking at doing something with 2 Church Street. So I was sitting as a trustee way back when. So I think I had heard that I had seen them 100 years ago. Yeah. So I kind of have a different visual than most people sitting on the board. So I understand what you're saying. Joe, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I do have a question. How, the addition that's, can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me or no?
It's very low.
My question is, how many square feet is actually the square footage of the addition that's proposed?
1,000.
1,000.
So is that calculated and contributing to the need of more parking?
It is.
So in essence, and I'm, the board can, choose, they're gonna vote and so forth, and I understand it's not a parking variance for the number of spaces, but in the existing conditions of the building, when you calculate it out, it would come out with 1 number of parking spaces, and with the addition, when you calculate it against the village code, that increases the amount or the need of more parking spaces. So in essence, the statement to just say that, well, we're not increasing anything, the addition does play a factor into the number of parking spaces and potentially the size of the spaces, because if you were not increasing the size of the building, the number of parking spaces would be less, and you may be able to expand the size of the spaces if need be. So there is some sort of, part of it is by doing the addition, it does play a factor into the parking.
But it's correct, right? The calculation on the parking is affected by the square footage. And we have calculated the change in the parking requirement as part of our submission to the planning board. And under their purview, your code happens to put the waiver on parking space count with the planning board. So we have presented to them our position on that issue. And we're hopefully going to be able to persuade them in the positive that if we get the variances and there's not a substantial reduction in the number of existing parking spaces by virtue of not getting the variances and having to modify the parking lot, then they're faced with a decision on the waiver that we've asked for. So the gentleman is absolutely correct. The calculation has been done. It's represented on our plans. There is a change, and we're asking the planning board for a waiver from that.
Yes, it's not
Yes.
something we're voting on today.
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, my client likes to say, I currently have 0 parking spaces, and now I have 80. Right? And to the comment about these variances go with the property. So take away the use here, right? And that discussion. You have a functioning parking lot that has minor deficiencies that we're going to legalize. So even if it's not this tenant, the next one won't have to face that issue. Key point, functioning parking lot, people can come and go safely. The deficiencies are minor in terms of parking spaces. In fact, there are codes these days that have parking space requirements that aren't dissimilar from what we have, a little smaller. Just kind of, so again, for you to consider as you deliberate on the merits of our application, the benefits of the applicant versus the detriment to the community.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing? Well, it's still.
I'm back, John. Can I just do that? I'm sorry.
Going up Church Street some time ago, I don't know if it was 12 or 14, it used to be a medical building. It's on the left side of the parking lot. It was converted from medical use to residential use. That building has absolutely no parking, okay? So my point in bringing that to the attention of the board is that is there an arrangement or will there be an arrangement? Or is there presently an arrangement for that building to use some of the parking of the proposed parking area?
That's not
That's
our
not our
purview.
purview.
So the only things
I
that,
don't think it
yeah,
into that.
we can't vote on. So
We won't
can't
talk
discuss
about
or
that.
make a
I'm not gonna get into
No.
that tonight.
I understand that you can't vote on it, but. You know,
I don't even want to go down that road because it really, I can't mix the two. And actually, the other building has already been before us and that.
no, I
case is closed.
understand they're legal.
So they're done.
okay.
And I don't want to start, if they make an arrangement with them, that's on them in the evening, that I have nothing to do with that.
We
And,
cannot.
and I don't
consider-
want to.
We're not allowed to consider.
You're not allowed.
Okay, no, I understand, but will that have an impact on the
Not
required
at all.
parking? Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the public to speak on this application? If there's no one else to speak on this application, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved, Olga.
Is there a second?
Second, Brian.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, Brian, you're not voting tonight. I'm sorry.
Second, Mike.
I'm sorry, Brian.
Okay.
Brian is our alternate, but there are 5 regular minutes, so just hang in there, hang tight to me. Because you will be up next.
Thank you.
You had it, you were with me. Okay.
I did the same thing.
So if there's no objection to closing the public hearing,
Mhm.
the public hearing is now closed. if there is no other questions from the board, I think we are ready to go through our variance test.
Great.
Madam Chair, are we allowed to consider all of these together under the 5 factors? Instead of doing them individually?
That would be nice if we could.
Yeah, yes, you
It's all the
can.
same thing.
And in particular, a number of them relate to the
Thank
parking
you,
lot.
Linda.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We love you.
Thank you, Linda.
A number of them relate to the parking lot, so they really are related. And we've done this on other applications. We did this on 30 Water Street. We considered the variances sort of in groups. So yes.
So the only one that cannot go under the group is the buffer.
Yeah, you should just separately set forth the reasons on that.
Okay, that's fine.
So doing them together, but talk separately.
Yes.
Before we get to that though, there was a mention of another agency, the Taconic State Park Commission,
It's
Then what-
actually the New York State,
New York State Park Commission.
and that has nothing to do with us.
Okay,
That is-
so
just
they have
because-
no.
Just because we grab a grant of variance,
Yeah.
that doesn't like remove their
Right.
rights.
No, they still have to.
We're just doing
That's it.
listening.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
All
make
we're
sure.
just looking at is our
Okay.
little piece
Very narrow.
of that pie, and our pie is, can they do parking? And-
Good consideration.
And even the setback, I wish you would be the end all be all, but it's not. We still have other folks to convince this is the right thing to do.
So the board prepared to-
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I was good.
So as the board is aware, you must engage in a balancing test to determine the benefit to the applicant against the detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and community. And so there are 5 factors that you must consider. And so the first factor is whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variance.
For the buffer zone, I'm going to say no, as long as with the property, that additional space that encroaches upon the buffer remains publicly accessible and usable. I mean, obviously there's safety considerations if it's icy, needs to be cleaned up, but as long as that is publicly accessible, it does look nicer and is improving in the character of the neighborhood. And they already hit the buffer as it is now, so I do think it's an improvement.
And they're actually coming a little bit closer to the building and away from the buffer.
Mhm.
I agree.
Me too.
I'm just gonna roll with it. So for the parking spaces, I know that there's an increased requirement for parking. But they are increasing the number of spots, and even with 2,000 additional square feet of space, 1,000 on one floor, 1,000 on the second floor, I don't think it's too far off to consider that as a unified structure, all 80 parking spots belonging to them. This to me actually seems like a better situation than we've been presented with in the past
I
and
agree.
voted on. We have a senior housing facility we voted on that has 77 parking spaces set in the 70s, which is half of what they need. So I think this is an improvement upon those conditions.
And let's not forget too, it's a one-way flow, which I think
Mhm.
makes a big difference.
Yeah, because they get to put more in there.
Yes.
And I also want to say that the existing building
Mhm.
has no parking, like
Mhm.
technically attached to it, so this actually gives them
Mhm.
a little bit more leeway to utilize parking, you know, for both buildings, so it actually frees up our Main Street from some of the parking, some of the parking issues that are there.
Great. So the second factor is whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance.
I can say no. I think this is an elegant solution, and there isn't a lot of leeway for them to do something different.
Short of building a 2-story parking garage on that site.
We would love that, but we can't afford it. Right.
So for parking, I would say no, but for the disturbance in the aqueduct buffer, I would say yes. There's no requirement that they go all the way to the buffer. It is a choice. However, I do understand the aesthetic value of it, but under this, I would have to say yes.
And as they noted in their presentation, tying the 2 buildings together, I think makes it it's a pleasing you know, look to what they're doing, and I think there's little opportunity to change that.
Agreed.
Okay, so third factor is whether the requested area variances are substantial.
The parking spaces, and I'm gonna say this, because I think there's only 4, that the difference between 8 or 6, between 80 and 86. I think that was the number that they came up with, that's required.
Mhm.
So the parking spaces, I would say 6 parking spaces, and my answer to that would be no. But to the buffer, you know, I think, I don't know if you would say it was substantial because the building actually is already on the buffer, so, you know, to actually move.
Well, they're changing it, which resets them, so it is substantial, but I don't think it's a determinative, right? Because
Just-
it's an improvement.
It
To
is-
clarify
it's
something on the
Yes.
parking, it's not the number of parking spaces. It's the size of the spaces, the size
get
of the
there yet.
aisle width, and the setback to the property line.
I didn't get there yet.
With respect to the parking, it's not the number of parking spaces. That will be the planning board.
We can't talk about the number, that's what she's getting at.
Right,
No, I was
it's on the space, on the parking spaces, it's the size of the spaces. Some of them don't have the width or the length. It's the aisle width. And it's the setback to the property line. And then
the
also
load-
the loading
And
space.
the loading part, yeah.
Right, so. To our land use attorney, didn't let me finish the last part of that. The parking setbacks were 2 feet. On some. As the variance was 2 feet max on some of the spaces, 4.8 feet max on certain spaces, and the aisle width was 4.8 feet. 4.8 feet max, and the size of the parking spaces ranged from 0.4 feet to or 1.2 feet max. So, is that substantial? Then I would say no, because it's a limited amount. And again, the varying, they're not all the same, so not all the spaces, all 80 spaces would fit in that criteria.
I agree.
I agree. And the same thing with the variance on the square footage. It's a substantial number, but I don't think it's got a negative impact on,
No, it's not.
The overall.
Not determined.
not the church.
With the ultimate impact.
They are bringing the spaces up to code, which is a positive. So they're in terms of their size, so I see that as an overwhelming benefit compared to.
Well, they're not changing the existing spaces, which are not up to code. So what they're just asking for is for us to agree to the fact that there are spaces that are too short and, you know, or not, you know, up to code as they exist currently.
That's what the variance is.
Right, the additional spaces will be fine. It's the ones that are already there. And they're really the ones, if you remember by the look, they're the ones closest to the adjacent building.
Mhm.
Those are the ones that are pretty much the ones that are really totally out of sync.
Look it up.
Okay, so we're ready, okay. So the next factor is whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood.
No, and I do not think it will have an adverse effect. I think that it is visually using the two buildings tied together. It actually is an improvement on the streetscape.
On the aesthetics, yeah.
Agree.
I agree.
And then the fifth factor is whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the board, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the variances.
I used to misunderstand how this is read, but I get it now. Thank you, Linda. It is not self-created because they're pre-existing.
Yes.
The code has changed and it is what it is now. But also the buffer, they don't determine, the building is where it is. It's already encroaching on the buffer. The pre-existing plaza thing is already encroaching on the buffer. That's not self-created.
The parking lot is existing and that was not self-created. So they purchased a building that was built in 1977 that is it is what it is.
Yes.
So they are asking for improvements for a building that it already exists.
Mhm.
I think the only thing we missed, Taryn, and Linda's probably jumping in her seat, is the, going back, and I don't know if we can catch it here, the, delivery.
Oh, yes, the loading berth. So that is, and I think that's the one point that is relevant, that John brought up, which is anything that we decide today in a variance does live with the building until somebody changes it in a way that forces them to go back through the process. And so if one medical were to go out of business or were to change hands and it became a retail location without a loading berth, now we have a different set of issues. And so I don't know what the remedy is for that.
Well,
So there's no loading berth for this building today.
Right. That is correct.
So they're not worsening the condition. It's, again, it's an existing condition.
So we can, so I would in that term say that it is an existing condition. It is a retail space. There were businesses in there. There was no loading.
And also because of the case we have following this one, I think it's very important that we delineate between pre-existing, like approved non-conforming and not approved non-conforming.
Right.
Well, I mean, at one point there was a bank there, so that I'm sure they had deliveries.
Yeah.
Also,
And again, pre-existing non-conforming, so.
yes, also, often, the streets aren't wide enough. So if you do deliveries, you can't get by. There's enough room here because it is one way. There's enough room if their trucks pull up on one side to get around them, so it doesn't substantially impact the traffic pattern the way it would say on Hunter Street, where there's parking on both sides and a 2-lane road, and you can't do all of those things at once.
And I also want to say that, you know, to their, in their presentation, they did note that deliveries can be scheduled at a time where would be the least impact on the building, so.
As well.
Well, now they control the whole parking lot, so
Yes.
it makes it easier. Okay,
So after considering all of your factors, you must engage in the balancing test to determine whether or not you should grant the area variance requested.
So with all of the factors going through, it is, I believe, our determination that this application be approved with the necessary changes, or the necessary variance applications.
Need a motion?
And may I get a motion?
Not so moved.
Seconded, Olga.
to approve.
Yeah, to approve. Roll call vote.
Mr. Brown,
He's not voting.
He's not voting?
Mr. Spall,
Aye.
Mr. Dryo,
Aye.
Ms. Montez,
Aye.
Mr. Aberezak,
Aye,
Chair Cheatham.
Aye.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
thank you.
Good
Good
night.
luck.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with the process.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Lindsay, I'll call you.
Thank you.
And tell my friend happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda,
Brian will probably be able to.
Yes,
vote. I'm recusing myself from the next case.
Ms. Montez has recused herself at the last meeting from ZBA 2022, 36 Yale Avenue. William Wilman Morocho? Is there anyone here to speak on this?
My name is Joel Greenberg from Architectural Visions. We're the architects of the project. First, happy new year. We haven't seen you since December. However, I think some of the changes that we made will make this project a lot more interesting and capable based on the changes that we have gone through. You see my letter from January 24th. I list all 3 of them. And our attorney, Joe Charbonneau, will go into the details of the criteria as Karen did. Number one, at the last meeting, we had indicated that we'd like to have a number of apartments at 5. We reduced that to 4. The number 4 is a very interesting number because I believe, and I think the building inspector attested to the fact last time, that for many, many years, up until recently, I think 2021, There were 4 apartments in there, which were there before the zoning was changed to 2 family. That's number 1, so we reduced that. Also, that's the use variance, the area variances. We had the apartments less than 800 square feet, and we've now changed that, so none of the apartments need a variance. They all now have 800 square feet or more. And also the parking has changed. The parking requirements for 5 apartments was 10. Now we reduced that to 8. And we do have a garage. Now, I understand that we can't request that we have the tandem parking as the building inspector indicated. However, probably in a situation, if the tenants can arrange it, we probably can't have 4 cars in there, but the variance, of course, would be what is the requirement, which in this case, 8 spaces required, we have 2, so it would be a 6-car variance, so that's been reduced. So they basically, these are the changes. I think they're all in a positive vein. And I think if you'll allow Mr. Charbonneau, just want to show, I don't know. Can they put it?
I can,
Oh, you can do it.
yep, sure. What are we looking at?
There's a lot of documents. Which one do you want to look at?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, show this one, this drawing here, which has the site plan and the neighborhood, the neighboring buildings.
Let's see.
Keep going.
Got it.
Oh, no. Well, actually, go back to that front elevation. I'll just say a quick comment about that. There you go. And you'll see it in the picture too, but basically, this is the way the building exists. This is the way it's going to exist. The only thing we'll be doing is to, obviously, some of the windows have to be replaced, but aside from that, there's no change to the building at all. And to the right, there is the 2-car garage. But aesthetically and basically the materials, which are all masonry, will be there, and there is no proposal to change it at all. If you can't get to the
keep
color
looking.
rendering.
Okay, it's loading.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm waiting for it.
Oh, there you go. This is the building as it is today. Obviously, the main floor there will be putting in decent windows and a little canopy, which was there, now is going down, just to give a little protection from the entrances. But if you go over to the left and the right, you'll see that the buildings along the street are a lot very similar. 1-car garage, 2-car garages, masonry buildings, several 2, 3 and 4 floor buildings. So that as far as the neighborhood is concerned, nothing will change because we're not changing anything. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Charbonneau, who's our attorney, and they will go into more detail. Thank you very much.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Joseph Charbonneau, 3 Star Ridge Road, Brewster, New York, 10509. Mr. Morocho is here if anybody has any questions for him regarding the application. So what he's requesting is a use variance. He purchased the property back in 2021. But prior to that, and unbeknownst to Mr. Morocho, the pre-existing non-conforming use of this property had lapsed. There was a discontinuance. The property was vacant for a period of time. He purchased the property for cash at the time. title insurance was secured, but it's not sure whether or not there was any municipal search done at the time. So what he did was he foiled documents from the assessor's office, which indicated at the time that there were 6 units at the property. He knew that there were 5 electrical meters and gas meters at the property. And following his purchasing of the property, he learned that the pre-existing non-conforming use had lapsed. And that based on the present zoning, which is the T2 family zoning, he would be limited to 2 apartments at the property.
Before we continue, can we ask some questions about these as they're brought up? So we don't get buried and going back and forth? Okay. My question is, I looked through all the documents and interestingly, there was only one of the 2 pages for the property data card included. And the property data card did list this as 1 single family. That was it's never been approved prior non-conforming for anything more than 1 family. So Linda, it's my understanding that this had illegally had additional apartments over the 1 that it was originally intended.
Joe, do you recall what it was legally at one time? Was it legally 4 at one time?
Yeah, I believe it was 4. It's always been taxed as a 411, which is by the tax
Multifamily.
assessor, it's like a 4 family and up. So I think and in this one, we had it marked as 4 apartments.
Right, but it did lose that
It lost that.
non-conformity because it was abandoned.
Great, so that was actually where I was gonna go with the next point. So in 2016, when it lost its 6 months after, right, 6 months and it's vacant. So when did he start the mortgage process?
No mortgage. He purchased the property in 2021.
When did he start engaging that and when did he do the walkthrough?
I think Mr. Morocho's here, so why don't I have him?
How was that in November? Began of November 2021?
November 2021. So when you walked through it, you didn't see anyone living there.
No, I just had neighbors that told me that there were people living like 3 or 4 months before there. But I
And
can't really,
And I think I would be a little more forgiving if this were your first home purchase, but you have several properties that you've been involved with, is that correct?
no.
So Wilman Maracho, 1222 Main Street in Peekskill, 141 to 143 Spring Street in Austin, 6th Washington.
I am not, I don't know, I'm not discussing about any other project that I.
No, the whole point though is one of the cases that your council has made in their document is that you were unaware, which seems strange to me because you purchased so many properties or been involved with so many, and these are very basic things to look at. So you can't be unaware of
These
these.
are the proper, we're all, the way they set it at the building department or the assessor's office. And that's the way we kept, because it came like that, but this property, it says a 6 unit. A 6 family unit at the assessor's office, so that's what I purchased.
I'm just gonna jump in here for 1 second. I think that the applicant is considered to have knowledge. And if they had done due diligence and checked with the building department, they would have known that the non-conforming use had been abandoned, that it had been a 4 family and nothing more. So the fact that he may not have done proper due diligence is not an argument for a variance. He's
Well, to
deemed
add
to
to
have
that,
knowledge of the zoning code.
To add to that, Linda, we actually, with the previous planner, myself, we had set up a meeting with Mr. Morocho earlier, and he was made aware of that.
Prior to the purchase of the building?
Yes.
And that's part of my point. And I'm only coming at this like this because after the December or the last board meeting that we had on this, where we just looked at some of the details and got access to the documents, I was looking through it and some of these arguments are a little bit basic. And so what I wanted to know was, is this the first time he's purchased a building or not? It is definitely not the first time he's purchased a building. It is also not the first time he's purchased a building through an LLC or in conjunction with an LLC, which means he's more of a sophisticated buyer than the average person walking off the street. And for commercial property, owning my own business and having to lease my own spaces, I know exactly what goes into the process. And it's a grave failure of due diligence and your argument is based on that failure of due diligence.
Part of it, yes.
Yeah, part of it. But in a use variance, we have to be able to legally justify all of the factors, not just 1, 2, or 3. So if we can't justify all 4 of the factors, we are legally supposed to decline the use variance.
So why don't we do this then? Why don't I have Mr. Morocho tell the board exactly what the process was at the time that he purchased the building and what he was relying on in support of there being 4 units or more at the property?
He didn't do due diligence. He didn't get a municipal search. He met with the planner's office before purchasing it. Joe, was it identified at the time during the meeting? Any of these details we're talking about?
Yeah, we was discussed about the zoning code, where you have a non-conforming use, that you lose that use after 6 months, and that the building was closed in 2016 and has not been occupied since. And if the only way you would be able to get a multifamily use is you would have to apply for a use variance, and that was explained. And then the purchase went through anyway, and now he's applying for the use variance.
So Joe, and I'm gonna, Karen, Joe, Linda. That particular building is zoned for 2-family,
Yes.
correct?
That's the present zone.
That's correct. It's a
Okay,
2-family
so-
zone district.
I do see in the paperwork, and it was kind of buried in the paperwork to the board, there was a pro forma kind of sort of piece of paper stuck in there with the 2 apartments, 4-bedroom and 4-bedroom. However, none of the rent, he didn't change the rents, he didn't change anything about the amounts going in. And I was kind of, I mean, if you're giving me a 2-bedroom, and I would assume a 2-bedroom duplex, going in the village of Ossining, I would assume, and this is just me speaking, that you could probably rent a 2-bedroom duplex for about $5,000 a month.
But a duplex in this building, I'm
I'm only going by what he wrote on this piece of paper.
okay, but I just want to clarify that. So you'd be talking about a single unit with 2 levels.
Yes,
And so 2 of those,
yes,
which would require a considerable amount of construction to the building itself, because each of the floors are self-contained. There's no means of access to another floor
I'm
without
only going
exiting.
by what he
Okay.
wrote on this piece of paper.
Well,
So I'm asking the question because there would be no use variance we would not have to do a variance for the number of apartments in this building.
If you did it that way.
So
That's accurate.
I'm putting it in the atmosphere.
That's accurate.
And by the paperwork that he submitted, because he kept the rent as if it were a smaller 2-bedroom or a smaller 4-bedroom, okay, the 3rd and 4th floor, I'm just looking at his paperwork.
Mhm.
He didn't change the amount of rent that he would charge. My question would be, if he increased the rent, would he then be able to look at the end of the day to make his numbers work? Also in his paperwork, he also put in depreciation, he put in landscape, and I'm sorry, I looked at those pictures and I don't know what landscape he's talking about, except for the grass that may grow up between the sidewalk, because literally he's on the sidewalk and he could spit and, he can breathe and see and hit the building next door. So there's like really no landscape. So I was kind of going through his numbers. I think that there would be a positive outlook if he actually relooked at his numbers, relooked at some of the things that he could do within the variance itself. And then the only variance he would need if he did 2 apartments would be 2 parking spaces, which I think would be a lot easier for us to talk about. And that's, I'm putting it out there because actually going through all of this, I think a lot of it fell on some of the things that we're talking about that he did know in advance, that, even if he didn't understand everything totally, I think that there are some things that could be, kind of reworked and looked at. I don't want to put it, because again, a use variance it comes to a higher standard. And for us to look at a use variance to come to that conclusion, we would all have to agree on all 5 factors. And, that's difficult to come by.
And if you're gonna argue that to make 2 units, to make duplexes, that there's a significantly increased construction cost, then give us that information. I mean, that
Right,
may
so
be
that's
an
how-
argument that can be
Mhm.
made, that to use this property in a conforming way becomes economically not feasible because of the cost to do that construction, but you haven't
Right.
given us that.
You haven't given us that.
In addition, you said there's no mortgage, but you've got a mortgage in your expenses.
Right.
So I'm a little confused.
Are we suggesting we adjourn this to give him the time to go and rework this? This is my question. I shouldn't have asked.
So we're trying to say there have been use variances which are extremely rare to get approved.
Understood.
Because the bar is so high, and we have previously said, hey, here's what we're thinking, we can vote on this, and you can walk away very unhappy and have one appeal, or you can take the opportunity to reevaluate the proposal. Because there are there's definitely one of these 4 factors that I can't vote for, and there's probably 2. So what Marlene's saying
Yeah.
is a very good idea.
Right, and if you say to us tonight, there was no, and I'm just looking at the numbers you gave us, if there was no mortgage, and again, you put depreciation in there, that's $50,000 right there, that's to the positive.
And the other thing I would ask is that you be reasonable with your estimates, because I mean, several of us will look at these numbers to comparable places in Austining. And I'm just giving you that awareness. We're not a rubber stamp. Our responsibility is to like do as best we can for the homeowners in the community, and most things are yeses. Use variances are very difficult. Be very honest with where your numbers are coming from. If they're not exact expenses, a mortgage, can't argue it. You know what it costs. Rental values, any of us can search those, and they're pretty high right now. So I would just consider that.
So
So,
I appreciate.
I would
what-
also ask that, we know parking is tight in this area. So I think we need some arguments to be made for the parking variance. Now, it's an area variance, so the standard is less, but that hasn't really been addressed. And
Yeah.
there is a parking issue in this neighborhood.
right,
So I appreciate what the board has said, and I will go back and I'll speak with my client. I'll refine the application and come back and address some of the concerns certainly that both of you have raised, as well as council.
okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I know the public hearing on this application is still open, so.
So I just want to go back about what you said about the grass. The landscaping maintenance, there is things to maintain the back. I have about 50 feet going back.
Okay,
The hill that needs to be maintained all the time, vegetation, all of that.
okay.
We'll address that. So I'm gonna ask that the board table the matter, at this point, and leave the public
But
hearing open,
The
but,
public hearing is still open, so if there's anyone from the public, they are allowed to come speak at this point. And, Yes.
Once again, thank you to the board for the public hearing.
Please state your name and.
John Perillo, 72 Havel Street
The difference.
in Austin, New York for almost 72 years.
oh,
So let's agree on one thing, that something needs to be done there, and it would be a positive thing if something is done there. That we can agree on. Look. I have no business interest with the applicant nor competition with the applicant. I'm here because of Yale Avenue in general. I use it several times a day. It's a challenge either way you're going. I think everybody that uses it understands that. It also appears at some time that a 4th floor was put on this structure. If you look at it, I don't know what the building department has, or it probably is a long time ago. It just doesn't fit with the
It's not
character.
before us today, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it still going to be a multi-use? He said last time that he may have an office there.
No, we discussed that the last.
Okay. So I do the same thing for the past 50 years, acquire, rehab and rental. I've never been to a closing to sell any of my parcels. So normally the due diligence is he would become a contract vendee, get his approvals and continue purchasing the property. However, in this case, none of that was done, and the fault lies with the person, that is trying to do this. So I obtained this from the Village of Austin Housing Choice Voucher Program. So if we're talking two families, Section 8 pays, as we speak right now, each apartment $3,338.
That's 2 bedrooms.
That's 4 bedroom, 4 bedrooms, $3,338.
So again, this is a really good point, because for the record, these are the minimums.
Yeah,
That's the
We
minimum.
don't look at any cost below the Section 8 minimums, because you can at least get the
Right.
Section 8 minimums.
now, that may not be what the tenant is paying, because that is determined upon their income. But the landlord, the property owner, will get $3,333, $38.
That's a 2 bedroom. That's a 2 bedroom.
That's 4 bedroom.
No, that's a 2 bedroom. I know.
We
that's a
just
2
did
bedroom.
this.
Yeah.
Ago.
So for each 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
Oh. It's on the bottom.
No, on top, it says 2 person.
No, go all the way down, they told me. Here it is. 4 bedroom, 3338. And you gotta have 8 people, I think. Allows up to 8 people. Well, let me continue my point, if I may. So, the Section 8, I believe, program goes year to year fiscally. And the calendar date starts at January 1. But 6 weeks prior to January 1, the owner can request and granted usually a 3% increase each year. So if he applies and writes a note to the Section 8 people in Austin, he gets 3% upon his request for each apartment. So it's a math equation, which is not a bad return. Now, he's going to be eliminating the most expensive part in rehab, kitchens and bathrooms. He's going to probably, and I would suggest that all his services are independent. Tenant pays.
Okay, I think he needs to give us that pro forma.
Yeah.
But I also think that, that's why I'm saying he's got to show us on paper that he's able to not make this work or make this work.
Right. Well, the reason I'm saying this is because he had mentioned that it's not fiscally, financially beneficial for him to do this. But if he cuts down his costs of rehab, it would be a nice profit, because the only thing he would be paying is homeowners insurance, because they would be paying electric, gas, heat, everything else. So that's my point. And I think I covered everything. Look, now is your time to clean and make this right. It didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to conform to 2 families overnight. It may take the next 50 years or more to make it conform. But now is the time to try and
That's why we're asking him to come back with some better
Okay.
numbers and some.
would you like this?
I would love
Yes,
that,
yes.
thank you.
So what Marlene stated earlier is if he changes some material aspects of his request, the entire request changes, he might not even need.
So,
Yeah.
and am I correct to read that there's 20 variances he's requesting?
No,
Absolutely.
no. And the number of variances, while initially when I first joined, seems like a lot. It's not, it's the totality of what they're asking for.
Okay.
Some people are like, this variance is 1 inch, this variance is 2 feet, and it could be any number of.
No, it's amazing, because during my tenure on the zoning board of appeals, we usually get like simple things, a 4-foot side yard reduction and stuff like that, so
Yeah.
it's a lot to ask.
Information. Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay. Is there anyone else to speak on this application? May I have a motion to adjourn the public hearing portion? I don't know if I have to adjourn it again. Oh, yeah.
So moved to adjourn the public hearing until the next.
Second, Bob.
If there's no objection to adjourning the public hearing, the public hearing is adjourned. May I have a motion to adjourn this application at this time?
So moved, Bob.
Second one.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you got one in.
That's right. If there's no objection to adjourning the application, I don't need a roll call for that, do I? No. Okay. The application is adjourned and we will see you in March.
Thank you.
And please get that information to Jamie and the planning department before our next meeting.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
You might-
Good night. See you, John.
Good night.
So.
We do have a few adjourned matters just to keep everybody up to date. ZBA 25-2022 is adjourned, and that's 32 Bell Avenue. ZBA 26-22 is adjourned, and that's 12 Campwood. ZBA 15-2022, 65 Main Street is adjourned. ZBA 05-2022, 16 Campwood is adjourned. And that's it.
So we are gonna, for your next meeting, we're gonna be providing you with a draft policy on how to deal with adjourned applications going forward.
Okay, so I was going to, can we discuss that now?
Sure. I
Okay.
just forgot, we didn't get you the policy.
All right, so I did have a discussion with our land use attorney and our assistant village manager and our building department, because one of our applications has been on our agenda repeatedly.
Yep.
And notwithstanding, they were waiting for some information, they said, from the zoning board. But they have not been before us. My question was, at what point in time can we remove them from our,
Adjourned matters.
right, so, and there's a couple of them that are just adjourned. So I did ask them if we could look at a policy, the planning board does have a policy that after, I think it's 3 months. 3 meetings. 3 meetings, that they can be removed from the adjourned pile. Right, so they don't have to show up on our list of things.
Without seeing it, if we match the planning board, that seems to be fair.
Well, the other question that I had was, and this was my question, if they've been before us more than once, we do have the information that we have. If there is something, and again, if they are in village court, let's say, or town court, let's say, and they have issues with the building department, is there a mechanism for us to vote on what we have? Because as long as they're in front of us, their court cases are like they're just.
They keep being adjourned there too.
Oh, got it.
So I think that there was some, things that we were working out, and I think that is where, we're trying to put together a policy that will be brought before the board at our next meeting. So I just want to keep everybody in the loop because.
Yay.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it too.
We'll have it to you shortly. I'll admit, Taryn actually drafted it. It's waiting for me to look at it.
Thanks, Karen. We get a little feisty. Thank you for joining.
I think the court system, I think the building department, I think all of it, because again, as long as they can say they're in front of the zoning board, they really aren't getting, there's nothing happening.
I was just gonna say, it seems like a legal maneuver to delay in perpetuity. Got it.
Yeah, so they don't have to pay their fines.
Right. Well, you didn't hear that from me and nobody at this board said that.
I've already kind of.
No, it did not come out at this, meeting. We did not discuss that here. What we're going to say is, may I get a motion to adjourn and say happy Valentine's Day to everybody?
So moved.
Seconded, Olga. Bye.
Good to see Olga wearing red.
To adjourning the meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And we'll see you in March.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, Joe. Bye, Linda.
Go take your wife out.
Look and see what time it is.
It's 8:29. You still have a few minutes.